Hello and welcome to the 2/22/22 SJV REAP workshop. Today's workshop is on new housing laws, and we have a big panel of speakers available to work our way through this today. So thank you for joining us. We have a lot of attendees. I'm Michael Segala. I work with all the COGS, MPOs of the San Joaquin Valley. Robert Phipps and I are the host of this workshop today. Robert, can you say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, Robert Phipps, Deputy Director with Fresno Council of Governments and REAP Program Manager.
Today, our lead panelist is Bill Higgins. He's the Executive Director of the California Association of Council of Governments. Bill, I pulled your bio online. I'll give a few words. He's been with CalCog for 11 years, previously with the League of California Cities, focused on local and regional planning, housing, economic development, adjunct professor at Sonoma State, and teaches periodically at UC Davis and UCLA extension programs. Bachelor's of Agriculture and Resource Economics from Oregon State, and law degree from University of Minnesota. So Bill, can you say hello to the crowd?
Hello, and I think that ag degree may play well in the Valley.
Very good. Also we have with us is Randy Hatch. Randy is a seasoned land use planner from the San Joaquin Valley. I know he's worked recently in Livingston, but he's worked in a host of other cities throughout the Valley. He has a master's degree from UCLA, urban planning. Randy, if I miss anything, please say it and introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Yeah, I have been a local planner for 45 years. And so I've seen a lot of things and experienced a lot of challenges and had some successes. So 31 of those 45 years have been in the San Joaquin Valley. And as Michael mentioned, I've worked for a number of cities, a couple of them just off the top. I worked for Ceres, I've worked for Lodi, I've worked with Livingston. Those are some of the ones that have been more recent, but dabbled a little bit in the Bay Area with working for Contra Costa County and the city of Clayton, which is kind of transitional between the Bay Area and the Central Valley. So primarily smaller cities, medium to smaller cities. That's kind of been my primary practice. And so I hope to bring that perspective as a panelist on this this seminar.
Thank you, Randy. Also, we have Matthew Gerken and Lorena Cordova with AECOM, and they're going to be after Bill and Randy wrap up. They'll tell us a little bit of a study they're working on for the Valley as well. We have a poll we need your input on, and then we'll open it up for additional questions and discussion. A few house rules. We have a raise hand. If you have questions, we have a question and answer function. We have the chat function. We have the raise hand function. So Robert and I will be monitoring that and allow you to work in with your questions as we get to them. We'll take natural breaks throughout so that we can feature questions then as well. This is a APA credit. You can get AICP credit for this webinar, and I will send that course number around in the next day or two. This webinar is being recorded, and the information on it, in addition to the video, will be posted to the San Joaquin Valley REAP website under workshops. A couple other things before we officially get started here. Encourage you all to go to the San Joaquin Valley Policy Conference in May in Clovis. It's going to be a really good conference, hopefully, because everyone's been at their computers for the past 2 years. So we're looking at having a lot of fun here. It's a 3-day event, starts on a Wednesday night. We have an opening night reception outdoors. The next day is panelists and panels and sessions, and we have a trolley tour of different sites throughout Clovis. Restaurant hop that second night. the scavenger hunt, electronic phone-based scavenger hunt. So anyway, lots of fun activities. This has always been a great conference, and we encourage you to participate with us there. The next item I wanted to briefly cover was the Blueprint Awards. We will award Blueprint Awards at the conference for outstanding planning, development projects, leadership awards from staff, and then a new outstanding local official awards as well. So the nomination packets are found online. I will put both these flyers in the chat for you. They have links to them. So feel free to nominate your project so we can properly recognize you. Okay, so that is that, and I will turn it over to Bill now. So you have the floor, Bill.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for inviting us. And just so everybody knows, I prepared a PowerPoint, but Randy and I decided to kind of co-present all the way through and I'll kind of spot some issues that I've seen have changed, and Randy will add his wisdom. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint here in just a second, and then we'll go. And I have titled this, just a second, I'll view in slideshow. There we go. I've titled this Housing Law Update, 9 Changes to Know. And really quickly, as you said, I'm from the CalCog, or the California Association of Councils of Government. Included in our membership are all 8 Valley MPOs. And we work on a lot of things like best practices and information sharing. We interact with state agencies. We do a lot of regional governance, education, and some targeted advocacy. So that's just a little bit about where I came from. So Randy, I'll just say this, he had nothing to do with the creation of this PowerPoint, so he disclaims that all mistakes are mine. I'll give you that, Randy. But
Okay.
this is, I call it 9 Changes to Know, and here's the takeaway message for all of you about to enter your RHNA housing element cycle. Don't procrastinate, get it started now. So if you're looking for my takeaway message, you shouldn't miss it, because there it is.
Mhm.
And so I have nine issue areas that I spotted, and I'm just going to go over them really quick, or I'll throw a curveball to Randy, and then Randy can share a little bit. But the first one I just wanted to start with was about the regional housing needs assessment, or the RHNA process. You're all about to get your RHNA numbers. I think you're just going through getting some draft numbers now. From the information Michael shared with me, it looks like most of either you're about the same or a little less, or unless you're in Fresno, Merced, or San Joaquin counties, and there it looks like you're going to get about a 30% bump in your number. A lot of this comes from legislation, SB 828, which was Senator Wiener, which actually changed how the state had to calculate vacancy rates and overcrowding and some other factors, which helped that, plus the improved economy helped drive numbers up. But your numbers aren't anywhere near, for example, the Southern California numbers, where in the SCAG region, where their RHNA actually almost tripled from where they were 8 years ago. They went from like 450,000 to 1.2 million. So even though you have some higher numbers, one thing I wanted to make at a relationship to this is, remember SB 35, also a Wiener bill, and this requires kind of more of a by right or streamlined housing on affordable housing developments for in areas that haven't permitted enough to match their RHNA number. And this is one of the trends we're seeing in the laws right now. It used to be in the previous cycles, local agencies were responsible for zoning. You got your zoning done, you're a safe harbor. Now what we're starting to see now is, well, if you've got to have your zone, but if you're not permitting at a rate to keep up with your number, then they're going to add, the state law is adding more streamlining and things like that to help make housing development easier and limiting local discretion. SB 35 is a relationship on that. And my practice tip again is your number is going to be a little bit higher. Get started early. Randy, you've been through this process several times. What tips do you have? or comments?
Well, one of the things as a local planner that irked me the most about the RENA numbers is that we can have the zoning appropriate. We can have our infrastructure in place so that we can actually provide services to those vacant lands that are within the city and zoned appropriately. But we can set the table. But our biggest challenge is getting the developer to sit down at that table. And one of the making it easier is our strongest and maybe only real tool, because we don't have monies to put down. We don't have incentives in a very cost-effective way that we can help. I mean, I can't count the number of times that I've met with potential developers and I said, well, you know, this is all ready to go. You're not going to be wasting time on getting entitlements. These things have been greased and so forth, and entitlements should come very quickly. The two biggest challenges that they say is, yeah, but what about CEQA? And that's great, but it costs more money to build affordable, especially at the very low income. And so what can you do, city or county, to help in that regard? And that has been a major obstacle. And that's the thing I'm most concerned about as we address RENA.
That makes a lot of sense. And I should say one of the issues I totally skipped over in my 9 issues that I identified, just because it's almost a whole subject into itself, is recent changes to the density bonus law, which I think kind of gets also to what you're issuing. We're not going to talk about it today, but that is also one of those issues where it's trying to get developers to the table in a way that forces cities to say yes, even if they may not have everything in place. So, but one issue I did cover, just a second, is I did want to talk a little bit about the housing element. Now, I asked Michael who was on this call, and he said it's mostly community development directors. So I didn't go over what is a housing element. All right, I didn't want to do that. But so what is new in the housing element this year? One of the big issues that housing advocates have had trouble with in the housing element has been in the inventory, or the inventory of all sites that you develop to show how you're going to meet your RENA need. Particularly in urbanized areas, there's always been a number of parcels that are already built or developed upon that you're counting as a redeveloped site, or are going to put a new project on. And how the rate of transfer has always been a bit of an issue, and how you count those has always been more art than science. And housing advocates have been frustrated about how creatively artistic some of our local communities have been. So some of those requirements have been tightened. For example, a good example how this works in a very simple way is with the ADUs. I know a lot of communities think they take a look at all the sites that their ADUs might be available on and say, look, there is all these sites, there's 100 there. We have 100, we'll count that towards our RENA, and HCD will look at it and say, well, how many are you historically getting a year? If you're only getting 3 applications a year over the course of your 8-year planning period, well, that will produce 24 units. And that discrepancy right there is a give and take between what you're doing in HCD. I bet you have something to say about that, Randy. So before I go back, let me just say, your timeline will also be changed a little bit in terms of you need to get a substantially compliant housing element to HCD within 1 year, or face some tighter zoning timelines. And an issue we're going to talk about later is you must address AFFH or affirmatively furthering fair housing. I'm going to set that one aside because I have a whole bullet arranged to that. Randy, any words of wisdom?
What this really forces staff to do is to be an advocate for housing projects, for density, for rezonings and so forth. And that may be places staff in a little bit of an uncomfortable position, because normally we as staff try not to be the developer's advocate. We try to present the pros and cons as objectively as we can, and we try to talk about what the general plan says on this, how does it relate to zoning, how does it relate to the infrastructure needs that a city has. And this really forces us into an advocacy role. And that's something that some of us may be uncomfortable with. And so I, put that out there as something that you've got to maybe talk with your city manager so that he's not getting blindsided if during a presentation you come on pretty strong in recommending something. And it'd be good if all of the staff and the city attorney, whether on staff or contract, is on board with that as well.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead. I just put really quick here. There's not a lot of change there. Just always a reminder about the no net loss law, which is a good reason why HCD recommends that when you're doing your housing inventory, that you actually shoot high and maybe do 120, 130. I think the HCD recommendation, which is a little high, is shoot for 130 to 150% of your number. That way, if you wind up downzoning a particular site, you don't have to go up and upzone somewhere else immediately. You have a cushion. Just a quick note about that. And some of the conditions have been tightened in the Skinner law, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that, just to highlight that and remind. Any adding on that, Randy?
No.
Okay. Also a quick note, a few valley communities have inclusionary housing ordinances. For a long time, the last 15 years, that's been a little bit in flux. You could use inclusionary housing for sale units, but because the Costa-Hawkins Rent Control Act, you couldn't use inclusionary housing to provide a rental unit. With AB 1505, that's been clarified now. It is okay to use inclusionary housing ordinances to create rental units. However, there was a little caveat provision in there that says that if a jurisdiction fails to permit at least 75% of its above moderate income RENA share over 5 consecutive years, then HCD can review your inclusionary policy for exclusionary effect. And one of the issues around inclusionary is there's always been a fear that some communities, particularly in the Bay Area, I think, were using inclusionary zoning to make housing so expensive it was in fact a barrier to new housing. And I think that's why we have that. Randy, Clayton might have been one of those communities.
Some of the standards for infrastructure were very high. We did have some inclusionary provisions, but they were limited. And I'm proud to say on my watch there, we got the first 2 apartment projects that the city ever had. And that's where being a strong advocate came in. I was fortunate enough that these came in about in my 5th year while I was CD director. And so I had built up a trust and a rapport with the elected officials and the appointed officials. And even though I did kind of go out and strongly advocate for something, they essentially trusted me, and we got some of those approved. And you have to develop a rapport with your elected and appointed. That's the takeaway message.
That's good. So we're almost halfway through now. Halfway through. Whoops, and I skipped one there. This is the big one from last year. This a lot of you heard about SB 9. It's the single family zone lot split that basically allows an owner in single family zones to divide the lot in two and put a house on each lot. And actually he or she has the option of putting 2 homes on each one of those lots. And with some conditions. One of the conditions is I think that if there's in a historical area, or if there's strict certain kinds of environmental standards that are threatened, the city can put a stop to it. Many of you may have heard of the city of Woodbridge's attempt to meet this by suddenly declaring itself, the entire city was a mountain lion habitat.
Woodside.
Woodside, yeah, sorry, Woodside did that. And that lasted all of 4 days until they got a really nasty letter from the Attorney General, and they met in special session on a Sunday and announced immediately that they would be accepting lot splits. This has an ability to, this is going to get a lot of media attention when it happens in each community. And we'll, the jury's still out. Some of the data suggests that the number of units that are actually going to be developed under this will be relatively minor. Randy?
Yeah, I think that, the media coverage talks about these thousands of units that are possible. But in my practice, I've been talking it up, and relatively few existing landowners or homeowners are interested in doing that. And the ones that are interested have a very particular needs in terms of family members, that elderly, handicapped, people that need some kind of oversight, if you will, from the main occupants of the lot. And I think that is still a primary customer, if you will, for SB 9, though it applies. You don't have to be related to the existing landowner or homeowner on the property. But I think practically it will be limited in that sense, because I've talked to a number of people in the cities that I've been at about trying to do that, and they just say, no, I'm not interested in that. A few say they are, and then even fewer of those actually go ahead and do it. But I think it's a tool, but unfortunately, I have to agree, it's not going to be the tool that's going to fill a third or more of our arena allocation.
There you go.
Yeah, can I jump in with a question? Yeah. So there is a owner occupied sort of provision to the SB 9, correct? So I think that might sway people not to do it. Like if you weren't owner occupied, you can just split it and have a duplex and what have you. But I think because of that provision, that might be preventing things. And then Bill, you mentioned previously before this call that ADUs supplant this need anyway. So you don't have to have a lot split if you have an ADU.
I call this an ADU on steroids, right? Because you get a separate lot and everything. But you're right. Actually, if you do like the example number 1 there, you're supposed to live in the unit for 3 years. To kind of, kick out the short-term rental Airbnb income property option. So those there's a lot of details, and we're scooting over those. I'll say for all of these, we're issue spotting for you here. If one of these concerns you, go to the HCD site or the other sites. There's a lot of information out on each one of these laws. I just kind of wanted to give a survey there. And I'm trying to keep in with your timeline, so I'm going to try and jump to number 6 now, if that's okay, Michael. Okay. Just a really quick, this is another Wiener bill, a small CEQA exemption for upzones going up to 10 units. Taking that off the books, zone changes and things like that. That's just another little bill to kind of help make housing easier. I just wanted to call that attention to it. It was SB 10, which isn't on there. Randy, do you have anything to mention on that? Or
Not really. I have to admit, I have no experience with this one.
Yeah, that's relatively new. I know that there's been some out there saying this combined with SB 9 seems like it'll change the way neighborhoods work. But again, I think that change comes slow. This is me wanting to. So we mentioned affirmatively furthering fair housing before. And I know when most people introduce this concept, they always throw you the map of Oakland or San Francisco, but these red line maps occurred all over the country, and I was able to dig up a couple from the Valley here. The idea behind affirmatively fair housing is to take a long look. It was originally a federal requirement. It's now been put into state law, and HCD about 4 or 5, maybe 6 months ago, put out guidelines, very detailed guidelines on the HCD website. Just Google HCD affirmatively furthering fair housing. And I'm just going to nutshell this. This requires every city to take a look at their data, their outreach, their economic resources in terms of where there are areas of opportunity or well-resourced neighborhoods, and where there are disadvantaged or areas that don't have the same kind of opportunity, and looking at where you're putting your housing. Are you putting all your low-income housing in areas that don't have opportunity? The new AFFH guidelines are going to ask cities to take a look at that and develop policies to address those issues. This is, again, I'm just encouraging you guys to all take a look at these guidelines in advance. By the time that you're doing them, there should be some examples of cities that have developed these kind of guidelines. They will also include issues to address displacement. If you're revitalizing a downtown and moving folks from are taking units out, there'll be a lot of different details to take a look at. And I'm just highlighting the issue for you here. I think that this is the biggest change to the housing element, and it's probably the biggest new deal that you're going to be dealing with this RHNA cycle. Randy.
Looking forward to it.
There you go. So that I just want to put an exclamation mark, maybe to sit down and read those guidelines right away.
Yeah.
Another issue, and we got 2 more issues and then we'll just stop. But this is just another example. This is a law that was adopted a couple of years ago, which limits discretion on affordable housing developments, that there's a standardized preliminary application. Many of you have probably already started dealing with this. Limits on hearings, speeding up the timeline to approve. And then for most communities, including those in the Valley, whoops, I jumped one there. There are these additional prohibitions on specific actions, like adopting moratoria, are reducing the intensity of housing where housing is allowable. There are limits on that. And this is, again, where we start on if you're taking a look at the trends here, there's what can we do to make it more certain, easier to pencil out for affordable units, limit discretion, make it easier on the permit seeking side of the equation. And that's been where all the law has been. Now, I'm a former lobbyist of the League of California Cities, and this was the same issue for 10 years ago, where, you know, the story has been local agencies have been the major barrier. I think that also funding and other issues are also major barriers, and infrastructure and a variety of things. But, you know, this continues to be the legislature's focus. Randy.
I haven't really ran into this very often. Yes, I've had issues where cities have had continued meetings and continued meetings and continued meetings, but those were the exception rather than the rule. And I think that these changes will only meaningfully help or impact a minority of the cities in the valley, because I haven't really seen barriers that have really curtailed in a significant way. My short amount of time, approximately 6 years where I worked in the Bay Area, that area had some barriers, and this could be helpful in that regard. I don't see that as a major issue in the Central Valley.
Well, and I think that mentioned, you know, a lot of these housing laws are being driven by, you know, circumstances in the Bay Area and Southern California. And it, you know, it's something that gets applied to everybody equally, even though the circumstances are different. In our last issue, and Michael, you tried to tell us to keep it to, I think we're going to be within your timeline here. So is just a reminder about VMT and climate goals, also another big issue. Sometimes we you know, it's not a housing law per se, but SB 743 should be increasing the cost of mitigation on projects that would increase or rely more on automobile travel. That should make infill projects pencil out a little bit more. And, you know, we encourage you, you know, to work with your MPOs to kind of identify those areas and their sustainable community strategies where we can actually encourage housing. And this will be more and more an issue, I think, as we move forward and trying to find that sweet spot between climate goals and housing goals.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my 9 right there.
Yeah.
And don't procrastinate, but I should give Randy the last word.
It takes longer than you think, so start sooner than you think.
There you go. So we're available for questions or anything. I hope that you guys found that helpful. Again, this is meant to be a survey. Hopefully you found like 1 or 2 issues that you think, aha, I need to look at that a little bit more in detail. I would encourage you to go to a couple of Google sites to go to, you know, certainly just go, there's so much housing law online. You can almost just Google the law and get some good information out. But HCD has its housing element portal. And actually, I know that Michael's working on the REAP, the San Joaquin Valley REAP site will have more and more information. A site that's a little bit farther ahead of that, just because they're earlier in the housing element process, is the ABAG website, where they have a lot of good information about all these different laws online as well. And yes, of course, we'll share the PowerPoint. Michael required me to make sure that the I'll probably spell check it first, and then we'll put it online for you.
All right, thank you, Bill and Randy. While people are gearing up with their questions, yes, thank you, Robert. It will be posted on the REAP web page. Let's pivot slightly, and then we'll come back to this discussion that Bill and Randy just led. Matthew and Lorena from AECOM, you guys are up. We're gonna talk about briefly an assignment they're working on that will benefit all the San Joaquin Valley, and they want your input on a few questions. Go ahead.
I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Michael, can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you, Bill, and Randy, very helpful. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining into this important conversation. I'm Matthew Gherkin from AECOM. Also on the line here, Lorena Cordova, my colleague. We are an on-call technical provider to the REAP program, handling needs as they arise. But today we're here to talk about something we hope will be very helpful to you, a guide to recent California housing laws and policy. Next, please. So Michael and Randy and some other leadership at the REAP program thought this would be helpful to have a guide that compiles recent new housing law that's concise, it's easy to use, it's easy to reference, focusing on the laws that are most relevant to the San Joaquin Valley, something that is easy to identify applicability to your community or applicability to a project that's right before you. And we agreed, we thought that could be useful. Bill mentioned that there are other guides out there, ABAG, et cetera, but we wanted to create something perhaps that's easier to use by busy planners in the Valley. And next, please. And we wanted your help with that. So there are two methods to help us out. You can scan the QR code that's right here. And then after we get done with this webinar, you can complete the survey that's linked through that QR code. It'll take 5 minutes or less, probably a lot less. Or if you like, and if you'd rather have a little phone call, you can email Lorena Cordova using the email address that's located here. We just want to know, from your perspective, would this guide be helpful? This kind of guide that helps step through recent housing law. What kind of a guide would be helpful? Short form, long form? How should it be designed and organized? We want your help, and thank you very much in advance. Turn it back to Michael now.
Yep, and so is this QR code the same as the polling questions, Lorena? Okay, so let's just take a 2-minute break here, and I'm going to launch a poll. It's 4 quick questions. Participants, please fill this out accordingly. We'll just take a couple minutes to do this. Looks like we're getting some responses. We have 34 responses and there's 45 attendees, so don't be shy. We can still accommodate you. 35. Okay, we're 2 minutes in and I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. And can everybody see the results? Okay, so mostly public sector planners on the call. It's kind of split on how often you reference state housing laws in your day-to-day work. Looks like folks want both short and long. They want as much information as they can get in terms of a guide. And by topic area is like is how they would like to see the results. Okay, let me stop sharing. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in that poll. That would very much help us. And Matthew and Lorena, what's the schedule like in terms of when our folks here in the Valley could see this guide?
Hello. We are looking at this spring to produce the guide itself. April or so, something like that.
Very good. Okay, discussion, questions, comments. What are you guys experiencing in your local jurisdictions? Anybody? We have no questions or no raised hands at this point.
I would have a question. I know it's not exactly on point, but I'm just curious if there's been any experience for this, and I mean, maybe beyond the panelists, to our audience as well. Clearly, developers are, impacted more by economic considerations than they are by, our RENA issues. But I'm wondering, panelists, whether you have heard anecdotally about any reverberations from any of these new laws from developers. Are they aware of them? Have they had any, is there any consideration of them in the development community? Any impact whatsoever about them? Any kind of addressing at all?
I would say that we're in the, like I mentioned, SB 35 in relation to the RENA, which is, if you haven't seen if your permitting hasn't kept in proportion to your RENA number at the halfway and end year point of your planning period, that special provisions apply. And we've certainly seen that bill being used in different Bay Area sites and Southern California urbanized area, but I think we'll see that in the Valley as well. Developers will leverage that when it's available to them. The other bills that we covered, SB 9 and things, are so fresh that they really haven't had time to take root yet in the Valley, I think. I don't know, but Randy may have more pragmatic experience than me because I'm just a pointy-headed guy in Sacramento.
Well, the only real experience I have is with the SB 9. I've addressed that in a couple of instances at the early planning stages. I haven't had anything go beyond that point, but that's the only one that I have any exposure to in terms of my practice.
I think that the development community is pretty sophisticated, but just like they also have projects that are, it takes a little while just to even get your project to the point where you're ready to come into the planning counter. And so, it takes a little while for us to review these laws, which is a message I wish some of our friends in Sacramento would learn, because, they pass a law sometimes and then they say, well, it didn't do anything. I have to pass another one this year because it must not have been the right thing. And a little bit more patience might be helpful sometimes.
Bill, you mentioned the RENA numbers for the Valley. Here's a quick snapshot of where we're at. So that's Larry. I don't have their 6 cycle numbers, but other regions have seen significant increases of the need to plan for additional housing. I think we're seeing modest increases in the Valley with San Joaquin and Fresno. Stanislaus and Fresno have probably seen the biggest increase that they have to deliver in terms of planned housing. Merced, Stanislaus, Fresno, and then a few counties actually went down. Kern, Kings, and Madera saw decreases in the amount of housing they have to plan this cycle versus last cycle. Just thought I'd share that. It's on topic to what we talked about previously. Okay, any other questions? Bill, you did such a fine job. There's no questions. So thank you so much for helping us out today. And Randy, appreciate all your input as well. So.
You have another question, Michael, if I may.
Okay,
I'm curious as to whether there's been any discussion, this just kind of was brought up today in my realm about the potential for a disconnect and particularly acute in the valley between the rising RENA numbers and the Sigma requirements, and the concern over water availability.
Mhm. That, well, Randy I'm gonna go with Randy. I've been talking first. This time, Randy, you go first because you may have some real experience.
That's definitely been a challenge because maybe a month or two ago, I was looking at that very issue, and it was, where's the water coming from? We don't know where the water is going to come from for this new area that we're trying to put some density in. And so that is a challenge that I don't have any answers. My public works people are taking a look at that, and I don't have any solution as of yet.
Well, and Robert, you actually, this is just one of many issues, I think, because I mean, in other communities, it might be, where is the land that isn't subject to a high fire risk? Or on the coast is, where is the land that isn't subject to sea level rise? Or, I mean, we're facing this all over the state in these different constraint points, whether it's water, flooding, all these, and we're also supposed to take a number of resilience factors into account now. If we are going to have, if you assume climate change coming on, and you have snow melt and spring rains at the same time, increased flooding, all these things that we need to be taking account for. And one of the issues we haven't really tackled well as a state in our laws yet, because we tend to look at one thing at a time, is, how does the housing mandate interrelate with that, interrelate with other things? And we even see it in transportation sometimes, where all these things, you're trying to hit a home run and sweet spot of everything. So your Sigma question, I think, is just an example of a larger issue and constraint that we have.
If I could comment, one of the things I've been bedeviled by in the last year hasn't come up at all, and it's completely, I don't think Merced County is unique in this, in that we've ran in the city of Livingston, where I practice, we've essentially run out of land. And looking at annexation, our general plan has properly designated land beyond the current city limits and so forth. And the council and the planning commission are interested in annexing land. The property owner is interested in being annexed, but we don't have a tax sharing agreement with the county. And the city manager has gone through several a year and a half's worth of negotiations and cannot come to something that the city can live with. And it's purely an arbitrary barrier, but I have found it's real, and it really is a constraint. And I don't really see that addressed in anything we've talked about. And I don't know if Merced County and the city of Livingston is unique in running into that, or whether that happens in other counties and cities.
very
Yeah,
good. Randy, I think this question or Bill is for you, SB 9. What is the minimum standard for memorializing a lot split? I'm gonna guess that's 1,500 feet, but I could be wrong. Can cities require the parcel map recorded by the county recorder, or is a legal description through deed recording sufficient? So if anybody has answers to that.
Oh, I admit, I know where to find some, and I'd be happy to follow up with an email to get some of that detail. I don't have that off the top of my head. I will just admit that right off the fact rather than trying to fake it. I do know that I think that the minimum lot size is 1,200 feet because I think that's in the law. And the minimum home size is 800 feet. You know, those are two kind of constraint points in the law. I think it's a ministerial lot split approval. I think that there's, you know, they can go through the process. There's nothing, there's no discretion there for the city to accept perhaps objective standards that are minimal and don't interfere with the creation of a 1,200 foot lot or 800 foot home. Oh, there you go. Somebody's just helped us. 1,200 square foot and at least 40% of the original lot size. Thank you for that reading. Christopher Boyle, thank you.
Okay, so in our follow-up emails for this workshop, I give you the AICP course number, and I give you the link to the recording and additional PowerPoints for this. So we'll add a specific answer to that question in terms of the recording question. So any other questions? All right, we're gonna finish up a few minutes early. So thank you once again. Our next workshop will be in late March. And it will be on Housing Elements 101, a refresher course for the upcoming 6 cycles. So stay tuned for that. And once again, thank you, everyone.
That'll be an excellent session.
Okay.
And we're going to stay on for a second, right?
Sure.
Thank you for attending.
Yes.